To What the Health? An independent approach to your health span. Have you noticed how our healthcare system may not have your best interest in mind? Join Dr. Eckel in this fun and sometimes disturbing exploration of the state of healthcare and what it means for you. Now, here's your host, Dr. Eckel.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to What the Health. I'm Dr. Greg Eckel, and today I've got my friend and colleague, Dr. Alan Christianson, on from Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona. I'm super excited to have him on today. Dr. Alan Christianson is one of the preeminent thyroid experts in North America. He's a naturopathic endocrinologist, focuses on thyroid function, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and hypothyroidism and Graves, all things with the thyroid. He's been actively practicing in Scottsdale, sorry, not Phoenix, Scottsdale, since 1996, and is a founding physician behind the Integrative Health clinic that he founded down there. He's the New York Times best-selling author of the Metabolism Reset Diet, which we are going to talk about today, the Adrenal Reset Diet, and the Complete Idiot's Guide to Thyroid Disease. So he's been on Dr. Oz, The Doctors, The Today Show. He is a celebrity and a great friend. So thank you so much for coming on today, Alan.
Hey, Greg. Happy to get an excuse to hang out with you. This will be fun.
Indeed. So I got this book earlier this year from you, and the Metabolism Reset Diet, and I love how you've put together really a simple action plan for folks, and I'm wondering, how you came about to write such a book.
One of the biggest struggles that people have talked about for decades has been just trying to get their weight right, and dropping a few pounds and keeping it off. And I'd seen so much conflicting information about some things working sometimes. And I wanted to pull together what we knew today about best practices for effective, rapid, lasting weight loss. So, yeah.
Awesome. It is such a hard one for folks, right? I like to say, we're not a weight loss clinic. We're a health promoting clinic. And as a result of promoting health, you're going to get fit and lose weight, right? You obviously have put together something that it's time tested, right? I mean, the way that you write about it in the book, you've had over 2 decades of practice with folks trying to lose weight, and really you're a health promoter, and having them come around to, to actually get well. What challenges do you see right out of the gate when you start talking about metabolism and diet, like misperceptions or misconceptions that folks have about it?
Boy, that's an awesome question. And I guess those answers kind of evolve as the various fad diets cycle through,
Right.
One thing that's come up a lot is the idea that, the only way you can lose fat is by going ketogenic, or that you have to eat lots of fat to burn fat, or that you need to starve yourself for long periods of time. And a lot of things can kind of work sometimes for some people, but I want to figure out what's going to be most effective for the largest number of people to shed weight, and really to waste as the main goal, to decrease waist size and make it lasting. So that was the impetus behind that.
Yeah, to have their waist size shrink. Got it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the fad diets, like, I know we've talked through the years of you cannot demonize a macronutrient, right?
Yeah.
We see this pendulum swinging side to side of, okay, it's carbohydrates, now it's fats, now it's all food. What do you do with that? So, who is this diet for, metabolism diet?
This is for someone who's had a hard time with diets and feels like their metabolism is off in some way. And that's the other pitfall, is that a lot of ways you can just plummet your food intake or cut out a lot of food categories, like you said, avoiding a macronutrient. There may be some short-term gains, but there's often long-term harm to the metabolism. And people get set up on this cycle to where they're dieting more and getting less out of it, and their metabolism is getting more and more suppressed. It's totally real phenomena. So the exciting news is that can change. You can make a difference in ways that can yield short-term gains, but can also make it to where your body's left healthier and more able to maintain and spontaneously be at a good size.
What do you see? So, we also have gone through multiple cycles of HCG diet, basically what we are calling fad diets. Now, I have seen that one work for some folks that are morbidly obese. So I'm wondering, like, is this specific for you got to lose 30 pounds, 20 pounds, or you're basically, this is a good program across the board?
Yeah, I struggled a lot with how to focus the audience for this because there's a story we'll get into, I'm sure, about the liver function and how the liver can be a big part of this. So there are those who don't so much need to lose much weight, but do have problems with fatty liver or liver issues. And in those cases, it does take modification. So this really is for someone who does have inches, especially inches around the waist that they wish to lose, and they'd be healthier for that. And usually several. So if they're at their target weight, at their target inches size, it wouldn't be a helpful, necessary fit. But if they are above that, it can be. And the degree to which they're above that, if they're within about 2 inches of what their preferred waist size is, they may do well on a single cycle. I broke this down into a 28-day cycle. I've seen a lot of data saying that if you do something that's a reduction in food enough to cause weight loss for longer than that, you probably make things worse. You'll probably end up rebounding quite a bit. So some people that have many more than 2 inches of their waist to lose, they do well to do multiple cycles with breaks in between. So yeah, the main thing is just if someone does have some inches they want to lose, it can be a good fit. If they have many, they may do better doing multiple cycles.
Got it. And that's that component that you talk about between over fat versus overweight, right?
Yeah.
And we've got this epidemic of fatty liver disease as well. So what are you seeing? Like, are you seeing, profound shifts on people's metabolic panels, lipid panels along those lines? And how quickly can you expect to see that?
That's the exciting thing when the body's given the right opportunities and the right circumstances. Yeah, the ship can right itself really quickly and can recover very fast. Changes, you mentioned some, we'll see differences in terms of lipids, cholesterol, triglycerides, fasting blood sugar, liver enzymes, longer term markers of blood sugar. These are the big things, blood pressure. And, some of those can change in the order of weeks pretty radically. We see many people go from being in a state of fully defined as being in diabetes or having elevated liver enzymes from fatty liver, and within that whole 4-week cycle, no longer being there, seeing those things shift afterward. And for sure, that person still could be at risk for, lapsing into things that caused it to happen before. But by and large, with pretty basic amounts of steps for maintenance, it can stay stable. And the thing that excites me the most is when someone says, hey, I already eat pretty well, but nothing works. And then they do the reset. And then afterward, they say, now I'm doing what I did before. I'm not really doing anything differently, but it's working differently. My body's responding to it better. So that's the cool thing. There's a lot of ways you can just drop a few pounds, but it's so awesome to see someone just reset their metabolism and get a new lease on all of it.
Yeah, so you're like actually resetting the set point, right?
Yep.
I hear oftentimes, especially, women and men, as they start to go through either andropause or menopause, and it gets even harder to get weight off. And it's like this perpetual creep every decade. It's like, oh, I got 5 more pounds. Now I got 10 more pounds. You're seeing this work even for those folks.
Yeah. And not only that, but I love the most when I hear feedback for someone who's like 6 months later and they say,
Yeah.
I really came back to my goal size in that reset cycle. And now it's months down the road and I'm staying there and I'm not doing anything different than I did before it. I was already doing some good enough habits, but now I'm getting more mileage out of those same habits. So that's the coolest thing to hear.
Ooh, lovely. Well, and when you're talking about multiple sets of inches to lose, and you're talking a 28-day cycle, and we'll get into the diet, everybody. I promise we're getting there. But how many? What time frame do you pause, or what do you recommend for a cycling of that?
Yeah, 28 days, then at least 2 weeks off.
Okay.
And some that need to do many or wish to do many, 2 weeks is enough. Others will do 1 a quarter for a couple times. It's pretty rare for someone to need more than 2 or 3 cycles initially. And then 1 per year is a good thing for maintenance.
Awesome. And this is, I guess there are a couple different ways to go here. So on this maintenance component, because this is this is an epidemic in the United States, right? And there's so many conflicting things. So one, I want to circle back to, ketogenic diet and, caloric restrictions and no carb, the carnivore diet. Like there's so many conflicting, and, somebody follows one of these and they're going to get some results. But then I always ask them, is this a sustainable diet, right?
Yeah.
Is this something that you can actually live on long term and look at a longevity or, a healthy outcome, right? How do you get people off of the merry-go-round of even just the diet thought, right? Because this is what you put together is a sustainable, really actionable, 4-week program for folks. And then maybe you can launch into like what's unique about the approach. And I'm going to talk about, we'll bring up the liver because you already did, but
Sure,
that's the secret.
Yeah. So, a couple of big distinctions, one of which is that I encourage people to realize that during periods of weight loss, your body is going through challenges. There are stressors on your system. And I encourage really avoiding most types of exercise during that window. So that's pretty different from what people typically hear. I encourage very basic amounts of movement and small amounts of walking and stretching, but not doing hard exercise. So yeah, during that 28-day window, there's the diet, which we'll talk about, but minimal activity, also really binging on sleep, getting high amounts that may be more than what typically does. And then realizing that.
Oh, we got you froze. We
Oops,
just froze you there. So after the binging on sleep.
So binging on sleep, so high amounts of sleep, we build up a very real sleep debt. It's not enough to say that you don't get enough, but also not getting enough for long periods of time creates an actual deficit. You're behind on that, and you've got to pay that back to some degree. So yeah, so paying back that sleep debt is important. And then things are different for the maintenance phase. The maintenance phase is pretty easy as far as some basic dietary suggestions. And then I highly encourage good regular amounts of many types of exercise for maintaining that. But one of the biggest distinctions that is unexpected is that people are not told to exercise during the weight loss phase.
Yeah, that's huge. And, it isn't just more, less calories and more exercise. So calories in, calories out, you're not a big proponent of that.
It's something that in controlled settings is never wrong. But the question is it effective for people and long-term results? And it's often not. Even if you do change your scale weight by that one algorithm, it's pretty easy to lose muscle mass and actually end up getting in a worse place for your resting metabolism, your resting metabolic rate. So the trick is, how do you improve body composition? How do you focus on fat loss and especially waist loss over just total scale weight loss? Some simple distinctions. There's a relationship between inches on the waist and pounds on the scale. And on the program, the amount of inches lost per pound, or I should say pounds lost per inch, it's often about between 2 to 4 to 1. So 2 to 4 pounds come off for every inch that someone loses. So it's common, however, that people can lose 6 to 12 pounds for every inch that they lose. And whenever that happens, if someone's losing 10 pounds to lose an inch from their waist, they're not healthier. They're set up for failure because they had to lose a lot of muscle mass since it was so many pounds for so little waist inches.
Yeah, so that's what's happening there. Is that why they feel so just miserable dieting?
Yeah, and also why they have such a hard time maintaining afterward. They've had a suppressed metabolism, their body's in starvation mode, they've got higher amounts of stress hormones, and it's like forcing yourself to hold your breath. You can't do it. You will rebound.
So that's the yo-yo that we see a ton of our patients coming in on, and that's the struggle, which is really real and why it's a $1 million dieting industry, right?
Totally, yeah.
So on the kind of the gimmick or holding your breath, that's a great analogy. I also really love the concept of binging on sleep, right? You don't really hear those in the same sentence. So that's awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah. So how does somebody know if they're at risk for being over fat versus overweight, right? Because it maybe not looking so rotund in the midsection. I mean, that's the telltale sign that everybody knows is like, waist circumference to cardiovascular, worsening of just health in general. So this concept of being over fat, what do you got there?
Yeah, pretty fascinating stuff. For a long time, there was a bit of a conundrum in the research around like diabetes, for example. They would see that many people, apart from type 1, more so early onset, more so autoimmune, that a lot of adults would develop diabetes, and it was very common in those who were overweight. But the conundrum was that many would develop it who are not overweight. They could be quite thin and not heavy and still get it. And then work was done that looked closely at body composition. And they saw that the thin, light people that were developing diabetes, they might have had a good scale weight, but they had too little muscle mass. So they had too much relative body fat. And the easiest way someone can know about that, there's many versions of body fat testing, which some have advantages over others. But the very simplest thing is just one's height to waist ratio. So quite simply, your height in inches compared to your belly button circumference. Not like, I guess, not the belly button circumference, but your waist circumference at your belly button.
Got it.
And it's healthy to have that be a ways away from half. So math example, if a woman were 5 feet tall, 5 times 12, so 60 inches. So if her waist circumference at her belly button was more than 30 inches or at 30 inches, she would be at risk for overfat and these complications. But if she's got several inches below that, if she's 28, 26, that's not the case then.
Got it. Oh, that's great. So so it's not at the hip ratio, it's at the belly button, right? So everybody
so
make
there's
sure.
been data about waist to hip ratio as well. And that's
Yeah.
especially relevant for fertility. So yeah, comparing belly button to hip can give some different numbers. But in terms of impaired metabolism, fatty liver risk, diabetes risk, cardiovascular risk, height to waist ratio is one of the more powerful predictors.
Awesome. All right. So when we look at, in the book, you talk about your metabolic flexibility.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is on, everybody understands metabolism. They want a faster metabolism. So it means they're burning more fat, right? In just general public. Specifically, what are you talking about when you talk about metabolic flexibility?
Yeah. So you talked about like calories in, calories out, and we never exactly, that's one of the problems. We never exactly get the right amount ever. We always get more or less to some degree. And our metabolism buffers that. A day when we get less food than we need, we draw some energy out of stores and we keep the lights on. If we're healthy, we feel fine and we can function pretty well. If we get more food than we need, we can put that away for a future date without it being stuck and trapped in forms of toxic fat. When we're not healthy, though, those things don't work as well. We have a less flexible metabolism. Too little food means that we crash, we have cravings, we have brain fog, and then too much food means that we store that away in ways that we cannot reverse. We can't tap into it later on when we need it as well.
Got it. And so you're not having folks look at their calories when they are eating.
No, I don't encourage for the program. I don't suggest a need of measuring or quantifying calories.
Yeah, I love that, right? Because you're getting away. It's more on how you're feeling. It's on the inches that you're losing, and how you're feeling. Like, physically, emotionally, how's your brain working, rather than just looking at numbers and that calories in, calories out component. But you're encouraging folks to measure.
Yeah, and I encourage you to put more emphasis on their waist changes than their weight changes, because that's predictive of health, whereas your weight is not always. You can drop a lot of weight, but just lose muscle mass and not be healthier for that. But waist inches changes as an adult, that's a good thing. You're better shape for that.
Yeah, and I don't know anybody who's, as we're aging, that really isn't looking at that, right? I mean, it's a big player. So how does the liver fit in here then? So, we're talking about, on the title of your book, you've got it up here in the corner, with a life-changing 4-week liver detox, right? Are you a naturopathic physician or what? Right?
So I talked about the metabolic flexibility and the body storing fuel and accessing fuel. That's all your liver that's doing that. The liver is storing fuel in different ways. And when it's healthy, it's got room for that. You eat more food than you need. Your liver holds onto that just temporarily. It's not attached to it, but it lets that come out and power your body at another time when you have less food than you need. But when the liver's not healthy, that stored fuel is stuck fuel, and that becomes toxic fat. And that creates this cycle of having a harder time generating energy, more fatigue, more food cravings, but also that can damage the liver over time and create this fatty liver syndrome.
Are there some specific symptoms that just jump at you? Like somebody's got, their constellation of symptoms that they really should be like, I need to do this.
Easiest things to think about would be first off that height weight ratio, but then also, how you feel when you do change your food intake. If you're someone that if you eat less, if you feel horrible and you have bad cravings and big dips of your energy, well, that's a sign that your body is not able to buffer that change in fuel intake. So that's a real clear sign that it's all not working well. And then also just if you find yourself resistant to weight loss, if you eat less and you feel poorly from that, but you don't necessarily see a lasting good change in weight, then that's another big sign.
Boy, that is so frustrating for so many folks. They get on some majorly restrictive diet and they up their exercise and they're just stuck, right? They feel like crap. Their energy tanks, they're cranky, no fun to be around, and then, and all for naught, right? What do you find with folks that have like, sleep issues? So they're not getting enough sleep. So they're running in a high stress level. Will this work for them?
Yeah, and that's the exciting part is that sleep itself, just taking the time for it and structuring things in a way to improve on that. I give a lot of tips and ideas. The book also encourages an intake of a dietary compound called resistant starch, and it stabilizes the blood sugar throughout the evening, even when you eat it in the daytime. And it turns out that a lot of sleep disturbances relate to drops in blood sugar that cause big increases in stress hormones. We shouldn't make a lot of stress hormones at night, but if we do, they wake us up and take away from our sleep quality. So it's awesome to see that change for people.
Oh, that's awesome. The resistant starch, that's amazing for so many things. I use that a ton for folks that wake up with migraines in the morning or headaches. How about with, have you ever found, or do you ever notice, I'm just curious off the side topic, is folks that get startled awake at night, like as they just start to dip into parasympathetic activity,
Yeah.
and then they just, launch. What's your thoughts around what's happening there?
In many cases, they're having big drops of blood sugar occur right before that experience. So the tie-in is that one of your main stress hormones, cortisol, it's in the category of glucocorticoids. So it's a glucose regulating hormone. And if your blood sugar dips, one of the many ways your body rescues you from that is it raises cortisol. So you pull sugar, you break down muscle tissue to make that into sugar. So for quite a while, I would use a thing called a continuous glucose meter with people and have them record their blood sugar levels, like 24/7 for like
Yeah.
4 or 5 days. And I would have them make a note on that. They'd press a button on the machine and it would show a timestamp on when they had symptoms, like just like you described, like waking up and feeling panicky or heart's racing. So they would timestamp that. And then when it was all done with the collection, we would look back over the tracing of their blood sugar graph and see where those timestamps showed up. And pretty much in all cases, those types of experiences, those symptoms, they were right when the blood sugar either got very low or was rapidly declining. You could also see the rate of change. So yeah, for many cases, that rapid drop in blood sugar correlated with a spike in stress hormones, and it made someone just wake up and feel panicky. There's a normal response to where we make a higher amount of cortisol to wake us up in the morning. And so there's a natural mechanism by which we respond to it. But if it occurs in a dramatic way and at the wrong time, then that's one thing that can cause someone to just wake up in a panic in the middle of the night.
Interesting. Yeah, that's huge. So what do you do for what's your recommendation for somebody that occurs for?
The whole program, so we
To
can
do it. Yeah, just get in on this thing. And I have the links actually in the chart, in the notes here, so folks can definitely find all of your contact info. I'm going to take a quick station break here. This is What the Health. I'm Dr. Greg Eckel. If you're just tuning in, I've got my friend and colleague, Dr. Alan Christianson, on the show today. If you're just tuning in, I want you to go to naturecuresclinic.com and watch this from the very beginning. Also, encouragement to share this with your loved ones. You're getting information here that you aren't finding elsewhere on the web. This is the real stuff here. So it is, again, a pleasure to have you on here. We're talking about your book, The Metabolism Reset Diet. There's this, so we just talked about metabolic flexibility. I took us down a side trap around sleep. You mentioned some sleep recommendations for folks. So I always like asking that, tips for our listeners out there. What are the big traps that you see for folks around sleep issues? I mean, it's really pandemic in our culture as well.
Three things, and I intentionally won't mention items that are talked about quite a bit.
Yeah.
But three things that are big factors, one of which is not getting adequate light activation in the morning. So there's this thing called the cortisol awakening response. And the more we get a good cortisol spike in the morning, the more we can shut off cortisol and get good deep sleep. But we don't get that spike unless we get exposed to sunlight. And not even like bright lights, not even like lots of lights on in the room, but something like sunlight. We need at least about half an hour within our first hour or so of being awake to get healthy circadian rhythms back again.
Interesting. So that's one.
Yep. Another big one is that each decade that we live, our livers get a little bit slower at breaking down caffeine. And it's a little misleading. You'll hear a lot of data talk about how, we get rid of caffeine over the course of 6 to 8 hours, usually, but what we make it into is other compounds that have very similar effects. And the whole process of getting rid of caffeine and all the caffeine-like derivatives, that can take up to a full day. And for many of us, based upon just our variances and our age, that can start taking more than a day. So if you're in that boat and it takes more than a day to completely make caffeine harmless, and you have a dose every day, you're actually living in a backlog. You're living with a constant backlog. And this is not everyone, but anyone who does struggle with sleep, you should take at least about 2 weeks and just watch how going caffeine-free affects your sleep. If it has no effects whatsoever, go back to your coffee and have fun with it. But if it makes a big difference, you'll know that. You've got one more tool in the toolbox. And if it does help, it's not something you have to avoid forever, but you may do well to skip a day per week or take a couple of weeks off every year or so. But just be aware if caffeine's having a relevant effect with you or not.
That's a huge one, right? Like an extra cup of stress for folks, right?
Extra cup of stress. That's
awesome.
awesome.
That's what I talk about with folks, especially anxiety and sleep issues, right? Yeah, that's a great one. Okay, so third, what do you got?
Third one. So three of three. The book before this one was about the Adrenal Reset Diet, and that one talked a lot about how carbohydrate helps in the evening. So many people either are avoiding carbohydrate across the board or they're avoiding it in the evening. And kind of like how you can raise your blood sugar by stress hormones, well, you can't shut off your stress hormones if there's nothing you have to make into glucose. So especially in the evening, you want, and not even just carbohydrate, but you want actual glucose, which you get starchy vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes. But without something in that category, even just like fruit or vegetables in general, you won't get adequate glucose to really lower your nighttime cortisol. So having good carbs at night with your evening meal is essential for good sleep.
That's awesome. And you never hear that. Yeah, thank you for those. Yeah, just knowledge bombs there. Do you have like folks, I mean, I live in the Northwest. I mean, it's dark up here in the winter. So do you recommend, like the sad lights or, 10,000 lumen type of thing and just get in it, right?
You don't have to live in it, but you're right. There's many parts of the country, parts of the world to where, per your latitude, per the time of the season and per the time of day in which your day starts, you may not be able to step outside and have sunlight. So yeah, the seasonal affective disorder lights, 10,000 lux is a threshold by which they're effective. And
Yeah.
there's some data, some little nuances. There's data showing that they are more effective when the light is from an overhead source.
Hmm.
So a lot of them are ones you could put on maybe you have a stand, a tall stand from the floor, or a
Right.
stand on the desk, but you actually want the light, it's like the sun, like the angle actually matters.
Yeah.
So if it's straight on or from below, it seems to not work as well. And there
Huh.
are some that are full spectrum and others that make high amounts of blue light, like blue tinged wavelength light.
Hmm.
And the idea there is that the light at dawn is more blue tinged, so it seems plausible. But the drawback is there's theories that those types of light may cause macular harm. So yeah, you want full spectrum, you want 10,000 lux, and you want it somewhere above you. And again, you don't have to live in it, but a half an hour within an hour of your first part of the day being awake is huge. So yeah, if you're somewhere in the Northwest, just set that up where you have your breakfast.
Yeah.
Have your breakfast and read the paper, whatever you do in the morning. Just have a light source like that above you and overhead. That's all it takes.
That's
And
awesome.
good ones are 70, $100. They're not expensive anymore.
Yeah, that's great. And are you, when you're measuring that cortisol awakening slope, right? You're seeing changes over a month's time or 2 months?
Yeah, rarely more than about 4 to 6 weeks to see a
Okay.
big shift in that. You can see that through blood or salivary markers, but it turns around pretty quickly. There are those, one thing I should mention too, apnea can skew that. So those that have sleep struggles, those that have a low morning cortisol that's shown up, something to screen for and to consider is apnea. That can be a big barrier for their recovery.
Got it. Yeah, that's awesome. All right. So coming back around, so you've got I have a question for you is how can your liver block fat loss? And, I guess I wanted to ask about the sleep aspect because that's such a big thing for folks. And I know if you're not getting that adequate rest, you're not able to truly reset your metabolism, right? Because you're just in
No.
that fight or flight stress response. So then we're looking more at the liver in particular and metabolism there. All of our hormones are getting, a lot of the hormones, I should say, are getting metabolized in the liver. It's filtering the blood. It's a major filtering organ for our bodies. So when you talk about, we're wanting to lose fat and inches in particular, what's happening here? What do you see with that?
Yeah, to be really precise, I talked before about your liver storing our fuel. Well, fuel can be carbs or fat from the diet. And the liver stores that as carbs or fat. It's basically, there's a type of fat called triglyceride and the kind of carb called glycogen. And your liver needs both. It needs some carbs to burn the fat. So when your liver's too low on glycogen, it can be full of fat, but it can't burn the fat. Almost like you've got a lot of logs you'd like to burn, but you've got no matches.
Hmm.
So yeah, it needs carbohydrate to burn fat for fuel. And that's what we see in fatty liver syndrome is the ratio of those two things get thrown off.
Got it. And it is, again, fatty livers, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is kind of a untapped or unknown major epidemic in our society, right? So
Yeah.
how does somebody know to screen for that? Or how do they know they might have it? Because, even a lot of primary care providers are just not tuned into that.
Totally. Yeah, the first easy thing would be some of those symptoms we talked about, like the struggles with weight, or also then the height to waist ratio can be a clue. Blood tests are helpful. Now, many people have high liver enzymes, especially ALT, and
Hmm.
they're told it's not important. It's not really pursued or diagnosed. So one step is it's got to be diagnosed. You got to have an explanation for that.
Right.
And other things can cause that. It could be a incompatible medication like a statin or an antifungal or something, or even an oral contraceptive. Or someone could have a hidden low-grade infection in their liver. You can also have autoimmune hepatitis, which is more rare and more dangerous. But there's things to think about. But barring another explanation, fatty liver is quite common. So one thing is you can see just blatant elevation of liver enzymes, but even within the normal range, liver enzymes can point toward fatty liver. And here's the numbers. So there's more and more times in which people get copies of their blood test. It's great for people to be aware of that. If you're a woman and your ALT score is above 19, some say 18, but definitely above 19, there's something not right. And that's well within normal. And
Oh yeah, that's low. That's low for on
yeah,
the ranges, right? Yeah.
yeah, some ranges I see the top end of the range as low as high 30s and as high as the low 60s.
Yeah.
So yeah, you could be well inside the normal range, but if you're above 19, you're a gal, something's not right that needs to be sorted out. And the most common thing, barring something more serious, is fatty liver. Guys, we got leeway up to about 30. I've seen some say 25, but yeah, we've got a little more leeway, but also well within inside the normal range.
Yeah. Yeah, I draw the lines 25 for men, 18 for women. And that is, that goes not even looked at, right? Because it's well within the range, the reference range. So, fatty liver, if you've got nothing else out of this talk today, pull your numbers and look, because they're on everybody's lab work. Their annual exam should be there.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what about, so we're talking about weight and, you've got your specific reset diet, but there's been no discussion about thyroid hormone. What goes with that, Dr. Christianson?
Yeah, super important. So for many people, one of the biggest factors that can affect basal metabolic rate is thyroid function. And in fact, I've been reading a lot about the history of thyroid disease and the history of thyroid treatment. And measuring basal metabolic rate was how they used to diagnose thyroid disease and how they used to treat it. And what they learned was that someone with impaired thyroid function may have a 40 to 60% slower rate of metabolism. So, give average numbers. I was just at where was that? I forgot, but there was some supermarket or a restaurant. Oh, we had a staff celebration, met at a nearby healthy breakfast place, and they talk about, here's the menu items and here's the calorie count. They're saying based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet. So a lot of general recommendations will say that's kind of a starting place. And for sure there's ranges, but anyway, to use that for numbers, if someone had impaired thyroid function and it was 60% off, they might be only burning 800 calories per day.
Yeah.
And to have weight loss occur, you usually need a deficit of like 500 or so calories per day. So that means they could never maintain the nutritional needs and be in a weight loss range. So it's huge. And unless it's identified and treated when it's off, people cannot successfully lose weight or regain health.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge. That is huge. So I'm curious, as the thyroid expert that you are, what's a complete thyroid panel in Dr. Christianson's Integrative Health clinic down there?
Simple thing. There's what you test and then how you look at it. And almost all cases, if anything thyroid is tested, the TSH is done, and that's good. If you're in the normal range, that's better than not being in the normal range. But there's a lot of evidence saying how healthy people and those that have the lowest rates of long-term disease risks and the lowest complications of obesity and the lowest body fat amounts, they're in a narrower part of that TSH range. And to be precise, the TSH is backwards. So the higher it is, the more your thyroid is underperforming, and the lower it is, the more your thyroid is overactive. So you actually want to be having a low TSH, not below range, but on the low side. And that corresponds with being further away from the hypothyroid range. Now, a full panel for someone who's not been diagnosed would also include the active hormones made from the thyroid, the free T3 and free T4. It would also look at markers of thyroid autoimmunity, such as antithyroid globulin, thyroid peroxidase, thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin. And the last thing is it would look at the markers of thyroid cell turnover, which is thyroid globulin by itself, not the anti. And then finally, we want to structurally evaluate the thyroid, which is done by an ultrasound.
Got it. Awesome. And are you guys running the ultrasounds in your clinic, or you refer out for that?
We use a radiology group that we partner with for the ultrasounds.
Awesome. Yeah. So so the thyroid obviously is not just by itself, right? There's some feedback loops of the other hormones that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And so that really brings in, obviously you've got to have them all in balance in your optimum levels there. So that is a big piece of the puzzle for folks. So, I just want, people to realize, if you are struggling and have been struggling with this, please get some support to go through this. Of course, the first starting spot is get the book and plug in with Dr. Christianson and his amazing online information, and utilize his clinic there. You guys do remote consults, yeah?
We do, yeah.
Yeah.
Here.
That's awesome. All right. So where to go from here? So what other nuances to this discussion around your metabolic reset diet? What else would you like folks to know about there?
Well, something else I talked about was uh, protein's important. Protein's a critical thing, and it's a difficult discussion sometimes because we hear a lot of strong ideas about protein being bad or unnecessary, or we eat too much, or we can't really get deficient. We don't need all that much, and there's some truth to a lot of that. We can't really get deficient if we're getting enough food, but there's really strong evidence that in terms of our hunger levels being appropriate, our metabolism, our body composition, how stable our blood sugar levels are, that the amount of protein that works best for those areas may be an amount that people are not getting. So a few more numbers. It seems that those best amounts correlate with about a gram of protein from a complete source per pound of someone's lean body weight per day. So
Mm,
lean body weight. Here's another example. Say a woman was 140 pounds, and let's say she was 25% body fat. So 25% of 140, that's going to be what, 35 pounds. So we would subtract that and be left with 105. So that's her lean body
mm.
mass. So we take out that fat mass and think about the remainder. So that's about how many grams of protein she would want per day if she were having struggles with maintaining her weight or keeping her energy level steady. That amount could serve her more than less than that can. And when someone thinks it through and looks at their diet, unless you're thinking about it and trying, probably not getting enough to help you the most.
Yeah, that's a lot, right? I mean, 104 grams of protein a day
Hmm.
for a 140-pound woman. That's a lot of it's a lot of protein.
And I
You know?
should distinguish too. It's not so much that it's beefsteak. Protein from vegetables is awesome and may have some
Yes.
advantages too. But yeah, that's a day's total, and it's something that we used to think that maybe you couldn't absorb a lot at once. Now we know you can, but we're always borrowing some protein from a muscle tissue every several hours. So
Mhm.
it's good to get that spread out throughout the day for best benefit of muscle tissue and just better metabolism.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you, so how about if we just throw one nuance in on this around folks that are lifting weights? Um, do you have a preference for people to eat before or after they're working out, or does that make a difference?
Funny thing, I've done a fair amount of reading and talking to experts on that rather recently, and um, the jury's out as to whether there's a window of time that's critical.
Yeah.
However, for many athletes, it's a convenient habit. It may be just a handy way to be regular about getting that extra serving in. So probably fine to do right afterward. Before training, if someone's talking about half hour, 45 minutes, low to moderate intensity, what they do right beforehand won't have a big difference upon how they perform. If you're talking about much longer than that, and you're talking about endurance exercises that are hard and sustained, or very high intensity strength training, or longer high intensity interval workouts, in those cases, it's better to have about a 4-to-1 ratio of carbohydrate to protein, or even a little bit less in terms of just your performance effects. For most people who are exercising in typical amounts, the timing is not critical. They could do okay with just eating on a regular schedule and getting enough protein.
Got it. So on that topic, what's your take on the multiple small meals versus like 3 set times or 2 set times? I'm guessing you're going to say it depends, but
Well, so for a
maybe.
while there was thought
Yeah.
that there was some magic benefit by eating really often, that you would boost metabolism by doing so. And
Right.
yeah, getting the protein is important for maintaining metabolism, but you can't eat all the time and hack the system. So let's say again that it was 2,000 calories. It doesn't seem that if you were to do 10 200-calorie meals, you'd be getting some better benefit. So what happens is you take out from muscle tissue every 4 hours or so. So if there's not protein coming in at that frequency, there's an imbalance between how easy we break down muscle and how hard it is to replenish muscle. So it's
Mm,
good to have some at a frequency about like that, but most can do that with three or four feedings throughout the day. So it's not that one needs to eat all the time, like greater numbers, but most do better for maintaining their muscle mass with about that frequency.
nice. Yeah. And right. That's such a good, I think also timing, if you've got a stress imbalance happening there, really bringing the food in around the same time every day is very important, right?
Yeah, so consistent timing, that's a huge factor. It's a hugely good point. The first meal is essential that way for setting circadian rhythm, but amongst the biggest drivers of your body's daily cycle, I should expand on that for the listeners. Your stress hormones, they work in a rhythm. We make a lot in the morning, we shut them off at night. Of course, if our stress level's high, the timing can be altered, but that affects many parts of our body's health. We call this the circadian cycle. And one factor that helps us reset and govern and stabilize that circadian cycle is just when we're eating. And the first meal is a big one, but the timing of other meals is huge towards that.
Awesome. All right, so we are coming down the home stretch of What the Health. Again, this is Dr. Greg Eckel, and I've got my colleague and friend, Dr. Alan Christianson, on the show today. If you're just tuning in now, please go back to naturecuresclinic.com and check the podcast button, and you can listen to this great discussion from the very beginning. Also, encouragement to share this with your loved ones, your friends and family. Get the word out. There is a component why I called the show What the Health. And so this is the moment in the show, Dr. Christianson, that I told you about beforehand. If you would share any What the Health moments, right? We were talking before we got on here, you do a huge training of your staff and your physicians down there, and maybe something from that or some story, and I say it with a smile on my face, but really the ultimate thing is it's kind of like you hit your head on your hand of like, what the health? Like, I can't believe this occurred when it could have just been solved like this, right? So yeah.
Sure. So probably the biggest categorical answer would be people trying to improve upon their metabolism, improve upon their thyroid by taking iodine supplements. And it seems really intuitive. It's something that it does make sense, and it's something that someone could be in a smart enough person, educated, and
Sure.
have it come out the way they wouldn't expect. So your thyroid needs iodine to work. However, one of the more surefire ways to disrupt thyroid function is to have just a little bit too much iodine. And the range between a good amount and too much is ridiculously narrow. So it always makes me sad when someone has been struggling with thyroid disease, not making progress, trying harder and harder. And it turns out they've been taking iodine supplements all along. It's just like, your car won't go well, but the parking brake is on. So it's something that, always frustrates me because it creates a lot of unnecessary suffering for people.
Wow. So it just slows down so they're taking thyroid and taking iodine,
or not on thyroid, but their thyroid is underactive or they're symptomatic from it, whether they're on it or not. But in any of those cases, iodine can slow things. So it's a bit of a paradox, but it's almost like, well, I'll back up a step. So what's unusual about iodine, many things, one of them is that the amount you need for your thyroid is not reflected by how much is in your blood. Your blood doesn't have enough. And that's not true of other nutrients. So things like magnesium, B12, calcium, your blood flows through your tissues and almost like they're a sponge, and the amount of the nutrient, assuming you've got it, is adequate for your tissue's needs. But iodine is not like that. There's a special concentrator so your thyroid can pump it in as much as 100 times more concentrated than what is in your blood. Now, once the thyroid gets iodine, it's kind of a done deal, a foregone conclusion that it will make hormone out of that. So whenever you get a lot of iodine, if you didn't have any way of regulating it after you pumped it in, you would make so much thyroid hormone, you could make your heart stop. It can be hugely dangerous. So your body has a fuse built in, and any surge of iodine just blows the fuse, and you shut off your thyroid for about 3 weeks.
Wow.
And many people don't regain normal thyroid function again. And what we've also learned is that we used to think it was like an all or nothing fuse. Now we know it's also like a parking brake. So if you're getting a little bit too much, you're going to throttle your thyroid a little bit all the time and make it somewhat underactive.
Interesting. So, and you see, there's a reason why we added iodine to salt, right? So in the Northwest, and I'm guessing in most of metropolis areas, folks have gone into, the fancy salts, right? We've got the Black Sea salt, we've got the Mediterranean salt, and a lot of these do not have any iodine in them. So are you seeing, Yeah, go ahead.
Boy, a lot of stuff there. So
Yes.
we added it in. We started that in the mid-20s. There never was really a federal referendum. Most states did adopt it. Many companies did. And
Right.
when we did that, the rates of goiter went down by tenfold, which is a huge win. But between salt iodization and the first 3 decades of it, in the few counties it recorded, the rates of autoimmune thyroid disease went up by 52-fold after
Wow.
we fortified with iodine. So
Yeah.
Denmark just ran this experiment in the year 2000. They carefully tracked it. And for 15 years running after they fortified, they saw an average annual increase of 50% of all types of thyroid disease.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And are you predominantly finding on your testing, most folks have the autoimmune type of thyroid, or?
Most thyroid disease is autoimmune. The tricky thing that a lot of doctors aren't clear on is that thyroid antibodies, they're useful tools, and they can show, if they're positive, that confirms someone has autoimmunity. If they're negative, they do not rule out autoimmunity. Upwards of half of people with autoimmune thyroid disease never have measurable thyroid antibodies.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And so on that, I see a lot of docs that are treating the labs, and they're following the antibody levels, which I have not seen that to correlate to somebody's status of how well they're feeling.
that's a great point. Actually, I was just talking with a group of interns about that a few hours ago. The antibody levels, they fluctuate randomly. They can go up and down. They don't really correlate with many health outcomes, with a couple of exceptions. They may, at their extremes, TPO more than 3,000 may be a factor for fertility in some populations. But by and large, they don't correlate with the risk of autoimmunity being higher or lower, or the progression of thyroid disease being different. They're really not useful things to track. However, there are other lab values like TSH to where it's not a perfect marker. However, we can't so much ignore it and just let someone's TSH go far too low, because there are dangers from that.
What's your ideal or optimal TSH range?
There's a lot of ways we personalize that in our practice based upon age, gender, pregnancy status, cardiovascular health, things along
Awesome.
those lines.
Yeah.
But as a general parameter, there's a lot of evidence showing that total mortality, disease risk, general well-being, overall metabolism is better when someone's between the bottom end of the normal range, like 0.4, and up high end of about, you'll see different studies, some as low as like 1.5, some as high as 2.5, but somewhere around that 0.4 to 1.5 or 2 range seems to be optimal.
Awesome. What do you find with, the endocrinologist, when somebody comes in with a 0.4 TSH, they start to get a little bit concerned. But, you're saying, well, optimally, it should be on the lower end, right?
That's about as low as you'd want to see it.
Yeah. Got it. Thanks for that clarification. So, all right. So what else on kind of optimum health? So I'm going to change gears a little bit. I'm going to give you an opportunity to come back to that what the health. So you brought up the iodine,
Sure.
talked about iodized salt, fancy salts. So you are not a big proponent of folks taking iodine. Is that what I'm gathering from you?
Well, it's not a good thing or a bad thing. We need it. We need some. It just happens to be that it's easier now in the modern world to get too much than it is to get too little. So most do better by being mindful of not getting extra unusual sources. It's hard to get too little with being on living in the modern world. We get plenty of that.
Because it's mainly fortified in a lot of foods. Is that why?
It's fortified in foods. It's a contaminant based upon industrial processes. It's very erratic in certain amounts. So processed bread, many types of sea products, like some types of seafood, sea vegetables, dairy products, egg whites. Also then the salt you mentioned, then supplements. These are all things that can have quite erratic amounts of iodine.
Lovely. And is it in particular, is it more concerning with the Hashimoto's or a autoimmune type of thyroid issue with the iodine products, or on that balance?
Really all kinds of thyroid disease, including thyroid cancer, Graves, subclinical hypothyroidism, non-specific hypothyroidism. So it's relevant to all of those.
Great. All right. So on to a little bit different topic. So we'll just kind of rapid fire here towards the end of our show. We got 2 minutes to go. What is the biggest lever that you've moved in your own life that has made the biggest difference in your health?
Something I would talk about that's distinct from what others might mention. I would encourage others to emulate too. So much evidence on this, but just time in nature, you know,
Mm.
mountains of data about this being helpful for us in very direct ways you want to understand, but also many indirect ways that can seem odd and hard to comprehend. But our bodies are really anchored to being in natural environments. It seems the minimal effective dose is somewhere around 20 minutes per day, but that's something that I try very hard to stay on top of. And if I ever can't, I think it affects me more than many other things. So yeah, I'd highly encourage listeners to think about their RDA for exposure to nature and getting some daily minimums into their life.
That warms my heart so much, Alan. Thank you for bringing that up. It is, kind of the pat answer coming from the naturopathic doctors, right? But we are part of the planet. Like, it makes total sense, and we feel better for it, right?
Yeah.
I know, you live in that wonderful area with like hundreds of trails right outside your door. It makes it super easy to do it, right? So for folks that don't have adequate access, it's just getting outside, really. And,
Yeah, getting outside, even just in a small backyard, even if you're putting some plants around you, even indoors, but any way to be around elements of the living world is just super, super effective.
yeah. I thank you so much for coming on. It's been so fun talking with you here. And I hope, again, everybody, this is his book. I've got the contact information for Dr. Christianson under the notes here. Please subscribe to the channel. Share this information with your loved ones. I'm hoping to bring you the best info. If you've got questions, please contact me through naturecuresclinic.com. Again, this is What the Health. We are here every Tuesday from 2 to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Again, thank you, Dr. Christianson. Any final wisdom bomb?
For those who are listening, it's critical to have someone in your corner to guide you and sort these things out. We can't all figure it out on our own. So connect with Dr. Greg and, work with him in his practice for your general health, follow his work and stay on top of that. Get a good resource like that and be consistent.
Yeah. Thank you so much. All right, everybody. We'll see you next week.